Okay, brilliant. Thanks, Michaela. So, good afternoon, and welcome, everyone. We know we still have some more colleagues that will be joining us, but we will get started now. So, welcome all to this is the sixth Pan London Council Forum, and I just take a moment to remember when we started way back in May 2020. It literally feels like hundreds of years ago, considering all what has happened, kind of since then. So the theme of today's conference is entrepreneurship and the value of vision. And today, we're not going to disappoint. We've got another stellar lineup of expert colleagues joining us on our panel to discuss really the impact of the pandemic on businesses owned by those who identify as being from a Black, Asian, or multiple ethnic background. We will look at the current economic state for those businesses, but as ever, we need to look forward and looking forward positively to provide vision for the future and showcase ways in which local authorities already are supporting those businesses and how other local authorities can learn from that to support those businesses to flourish. So before I start, I know Michaela definitely wanted me to put a shout out for the we have another seminar that's coming up. So okay, brilliant. Thanks, Michaela. Another seminar that's coming up. So it's on your screens at the moment. So as some of you may know, quite a lot of local authorities and colleagues across our Pan London kind of forum have asked us in Westminster about our inclusive mentoring scheme. So we have one both internally for staff and as some of you may know, last year, September, on the back of the murder of George Floyd, we wanted to open up a dialogue and conversation with our colleagues from the Metropolitan Police. So we started this inclusive mentoring across organisations. And that has had, brilliant outcomes. In fact, the first cohort graduated in, I think, a month or so ago, or 2 months ago in July. So please, if you're interested, if your organizations are considering this kind of internal mentoring scheme, you want to find out some more, you want to find out what the challenges were when delivering these, please come along. Okay, there's the date. Yes, it's the 20th of September. It will be on Teams, and Michaela has dropped into the chat. So if you're interested, you can sign up. It will be another Eventbrite session. So yeah. Okay, so I've done my plug for that. Michaela, unless there's anything else I've just forgotten. No, here I am. We're back on track. So it gives me really great pleasure to welcome our keynote speaker today, Tony Matharu, who is entrepreneur who has led a number of successful businesses in the hospitality industry. He's a board member of the London Chamber of Commerce. He's the chair of the Asian Business Association and recently was nominated for Outstanding Individual of Lockdown Award by the Hospitality Lockdown Hero Awards. Tony, welcome to the stage. Please, it's over to you.
Thank you very much, Serena. And thank you, everybody, and thank you for giving me this opportunity to have a chat with you today. It will be a relatively informal chat, and thank you for that warm welcome. As stated, I am the chairman of the Asian Business Association, which is part of the London Chamber of Commerce and Industry. And in fact, London Chamber of Commerce and Industry is a brand partner of the Central London Alliance, which is an alliance of up to 20,000 organisations, the purpose of which is to make sure that London survives and recovers, and the London that we know and love is retained in its new form. And our vision today and the discussion today, I think, will help to shape that. Alongside that, I am the chairman of Integrity International Group and Blue Orchid Hotels. We have premises and businesses in Westminster. I'm also on the board or a director of a number of other organisations, including business improvement districts, charities, third sector organisations, and I think importantly for today, the company of entrepreneurs. So I have involved myself in startups and developing businesses. As being from an ethnic minority of a nation background and a Londoner, I think I can speak on some of the subject matter. One of the things about the pandemic world that we live in, it's too early to say post-pandemic world, is that, of course, that whilst anybody could catch this virus, in fact, even those that have been double jabbed, the virus has spread far and wide all over the globe, and it's affected people from all around the equator, from north and south. It can affect anybody, but it hasn't affected everybody proportionately. So black and ethnic minority people have suffered worse. People who live in urban environments, particularly in London and capital cities, where there's a great mobility required for their businesses and for their opportunities to take place, more about that later, have suffered worse. Those people who are diabetic, those people who are carrying too much weight. There's a range of different people who have suffered badly and disproportionately, including those running businesses that are depending, as London does, as Westminster does, on mobility of labour. 500,000 people would normally come in on a day-to-day basis into the square mile of the city of London. But it isn't just those people who we've been missing. 3.3 million people have been coming into London to work as key workers. They're often getting omitted in the discourse. And of course, many of them are from black and ethnic minority communities, often forgotten. And when people talk about returning back to workplace, and I will say something about that, they often are forgetting those people who have been working throughout the pandemic in order to provide services and facilities for those, and including, and especially today, those entrepreneurs that have been providing services to enable key workers and others, people who are self-isolating, people who have felt themselves stranded or vulnerable. Others have had to supply services to them. I'm glad to say that Blue Orchid Hotels managed to do that. But many other people who were entrepreneurial in spirit and found it difficult to shut their doors when they knew that there was local need have responded to that. And I think that's very typical of entrepreneurs, and possibly even specifically for those from ethnic minorities, and particularly for those in London. So that's the state of the pandemic world and the current state of entrepreneurs. But there is one group of people who have suffered more greatly than others that often are not mentioned, and that is the young people. There's been discussion, of course, as a result of yesterday's vote, and we don't want to get into any politics here, and the Central London Alliance is politically agnostic, we're completely independent. But nevertheless, young people have been affected by the pandemic and by decisions disproportionately than others. The job prospects for the world's 1.2 billion people aged 15 to 24 have been severely impacted. They're taking the greatest hit in terms of youth unemployment. That's got greater. The possible loss of potential lifetime earnings and opportunities is greater for young people. The Urban Institute have said that because young people have got less opportunity to amass savings, and they've got a lower level of savings, and that's diminished even further during the crisis, with similarities in black and ethnic minority businesses, same kind of things, have suffered greatly and more disproportionately than other communities. They've seen a negative impact on their businesses, and they've had to had disruptions in their supply chains. They've had their funding cut off. They've not been able to access it. All of the same kind of things that have happened for black and ethnic entrepreneurial businesses. And so I think it's worth stressing that it's not just one particular type of person that's been affected by the pandemic. Many people have been disproportionately impacted. And London, as a capital city that depends on mobile populations, that depends on transport systems, that depends on the multiplicity of connectivity. So it's attractions and museums and galleries and theatres and the cobbler and the dry cleaner, the small and large businesses. It isn't just people who are working at office desks that have been limited. They require an infrastructure and a support structure that many black and ethnic minority business provide and would be providing if there was greater footfall. And of course, that footfall has been very, very severely impacted. So around the world, globally, youth entrepreneurs have suffered very badly. And in particular, those in capital cities have suffered worse. In fact, the World Bank identified this and approved a $200 million loan to help youth and micro entrepreneurs in Bangladesh to improve their earning opportunities and resilience. And they've offered counselling and training and other services because they see that they are integral to the growth of the business and support of economies. And I think I'll leave it at that. Everybody seems to know and recognise that entrepreneurs and businesses are important for multiple reasons, for prosperity, for growth, for democracy, and for civic society. And that means that we need to pay our attention to them. And in today's discussion, look at the impact on the UK, on London, on entrepreneurs, and on the Black and ethnic minority communities, and how we've been affected. What vision is going to be needed in order to do that? One of the things, of course, is that we need to recognise that there is an issue. We need to build an understanding, and then we can perhaps have the vision to take action from what is actually a resilient population. My particular personal view is that immigrant populations, first, second, and even beyond that sometimes, they don't consider themselves as having the comfort blanket of an indigenous population. Nobody's going to do it for them, so they tend to do it themselves. And I think that is part of an entrepreneurial spirit, where people get on and do, and that carries forward, I think, particularly in immigrant communities, where they don't rely on the local infrastructure. They've got less access to finance and connections and relationships and so on. And so they have to be much more self-reliant. They're not wrapped in the comfort blanket of perhaps a 3-generation indigenous population. And I think that would apply itself to multiple immigrant populations. But that if we just focus on the Black and ethnic minority businesses, and in particular London, I'm certain that is the case. So let's look at some reports. NatWest produced a report in 2021 on the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor report. And there were other reports partnering with UK business schools and universities. I know there's been reports from King's College University, and there's all kinds of statistics. It's worth probably revealing some of those. The number of entrepreneurs dropped by 25% during 2020. But interestingly and positively, now 1 in 7 adults plan to become an entrepreneur, an increase in 50%. So the planning is that that's what people want to do in the future. The BAME communities have doubled the number of existing entrepreneurs as other communities, 14%, as opposed to 7.5% of the whole population of the UK. And I think that's probably reflective of reduced opportunities and therefore having to do it for themselves, much as I've just described. Increasing numbers of young people, particularly from BAME young people, 18 to 35, now want to start their own businesses, even more than further. And I just reveal again that the BAME communities have suffered and been most affected by the pandemic in infections, in hospitalizations, in focus on concentrations in businesses and industry sectors that have suffered most and have been most needed, and indeed even fatalities and deaths. And I think that it probably serves to say that when we talk about recovery and so on, of course, we have to recognise the public health issues and the sadness of the losses of many people, and perhaps reflect on that as we look at new opportunities that will derive from the pandemic. So that's a bit of the context in the UK. The BAME community only has about 40%.
Sorry, colleagues, could you just mute?
The BAME community has 14% of the UK, but only 1.7% of all capital went to BAME entrepreneurs. That's a huge disparity in investment, and of course it affects motivation and trust.
Sorry. You're muted, Tony. Sorry.
Somebody may have muted me.
Yeah. Sorry.
Have you not been able to hear me at all during the
No. We have. It was just then. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sorry that I think that was an external force. And external forces, of course, have played their part in how we perform our lives. There are government directions and restrictions that have affected everybody in this pandemic. and of course, we've had to conform to them and comply in circumstances when it's been extremely difficult. But the BAME communities have been hit particularly hard, and the King's College report says so, that 61% of the self-employed have been more badly affected than others. And there's, as I said, a predominance of Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs in those self-employed statistics. But yet, the entrepreneurs are the backbone of the UK economy. 5.86 million small and medium-sized enterprises in the UK contribute 52% of the 2.2 trillion generated by private sector businesses. And they're particularly threatened by the current pandemic, because they have typically, as I said, fewer resources than larger firms. That means potentially that 16.6 million jobs are at risk. And that statistic needs perhaps repeating. 16.6 million jobs at risk as a result of this, with a disproportionate impact on Black and minority businesses, and entrepreneurs reflecting an even greater proportion of that. 61% of entrepreneurs report that the existence of their business was under threat due to decreased trading activities. That's a big number, and anybody like me who's been at work in central London during the course of the pandemic and at their workplaces are recognizing that footfall and the ability to trade has been severely impacted. Yet entrepreneurs, of course, are known for their agility and the ability to turn things around in a positive way. London-based entrepreneurs, as I've said, saw a greater reduction of trading than entrepreneurs residing in the rest of the country. And life satisfaction, and I can give you the happiness satisfaction surveys and so on, but life satisfaction of entrepreneurs outside of London suffered much less than those of London-based entrepreneurs. And of course, stress levels are related to that, and happiness factors and trust and other factors are related to that life satisfaction. But we have lots of potential, and I think that's really where we need to perhaps have our discourse on where we can get to in the future. What is our vision? One of the things, of course, that we need to do is, as I said, we need to recognize the position for what it is. We need to build understanding, and with that knowledge and understanding, then we can take action, and the action can be relevant to the current situation. So I don't disguise, and I have no qualms about repeating much that you already know, and providing the context for our discussion today, because what we do know is entrepreneurs are big contributors, that Black and Asian minority entrepreneurs are even greater contributors for their size and for their scale than many other sectors of the community, and businesses, of course, more broadly critical to sustain local communities and to the local economy. So that's where I start. And if we go beyond that to central London, central London generates £211 billion of gross value added, employing 1.9 million people, contributing 4.6 billion just in business rates. And of course, we and Westminster recognise that business rates are required, not going to be obtained from businesses that have closed up, and the broken window syndrome that then follows on from that. And of course, there is needed to have a targeted, focused support for those that have suffered most and are most in need. And in fact, London as a status as a global city beyond Westminster needed to generate a surplus of finance that can be redeployed to help the levelling up agenda, that help the transport and social services and the NHS services across the country. London is needed, and its safe recovery is absolutely urgently required because it is at risk, and we can't hide from that. It would be complacent to simply think that we will bounce back without targeted, focused support and recognition. We need to survive from and recover from the pandemic. We must draw people back into London. We need to try and stimulate activity where we can sustain businesses. And our vision must be for Black and ethnic minority businesses, for entrepreneurs more generally, for young people within those, to be drawn back to generate career enhancing innovative, creative workplaces and opportunities for others. So that's where I leave it, knowing that Britain has been particularly poor at trying to encourage people back to their workplaces. The latest figures show that in spite of the success of the vaccine, that Britons are less likely to have returned to their workplaces than other countries, including those with more difficulties in the pandemic currently than we have. And that's the global mobility data produced by Google. And we're down by about 40% against the norm if we take 2019 as a norm, where it's 30% even in the US and Germany. Yet the difference is not as marked, and if it's only 5% when you come to dining and drinking. So we can get people back to dine and drink and into bars and restaurants, but not necessarily back to workplaces. And we need people back to workplaces in order to encourage people to buy products from the local stores, from the dry cleaners, from the small businesses, from the coffee shops, the restaurants, bars, indeed even hotels, and all that support infrastructure, attractions and theatres and so on that we know and love if we want London and the city of Westminster and the vibrant activity that entrepreneurial business provide as a support structure and indeed a growth structure for many successful businesses in the future. And we need it done now as schools have returned and people are now focused on a future and a positive future. But that recognition, understanding and vision is now needed. My personal view is that entrepreneurs tend to look across the horizon and try to find opportunities if they are there. A few weeks ago, if we'd been looking at opportunities across the central London skyline, I think that we would have been very badly disturbed. I think things are moving in the right direction right now, but we mustn't be complacent, and it must be something that can sustain and be resilient. And I think there's an opportunity to ask me some questions round about now. So please do so if you can.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you so much, Tony. That was brilliant just to kind of just hear from you from the experiences that you've regaled, but also I just put in the chat that it was really quite stark, some of those statistics that you quoted. 16.6 million jobs at risk, and thinking about young entrepreneurs as well. So thank you very much, and I'm gonna, if there are questions, please, those of you familiar with our Pan London forum kind of framework, please just raise your hand or please put it in the chat. But just whilst I'm waiting, maybe from I can see one hand going up. Just one question I wanted to ask Tony to get us started. So you kind of make reference to those who have suffered worst, as part of the pandemic. And of course, this Pan London Forum was initially set up in May last year in response to the disproportionate impact that we were seeing from COVID on Black, Asian and multiple ethnic communities. Do you think that this understanding around the impact on businesses owned by those communities is, do you think that understanding is general? Is it accepted across the piece? You spoke about sort of like lack of funding into those particular businesses. I just wonder your brief view on that.
No, sadly, sad as it may seem, a year on from May, or more than a year on, I don't think there is that recognition. I don't think there is that understanding. I think on our own, ethnic minority businesses, Black and ethnic minority businesses, I think realize that nobody else is going to help us, so we just try to help ourselves. We have to suffer in forms of discrimination, either overtly or implicitly in one way or another. We know that in terms of access to finance. We know that in terms of the numbers that actually sought financial support from the bounce back loans, from the Sybil's loans, from the effort it took for certain businesses that maybe were able to access discounts on business rates. from our sector, we had a disproportionate access to it. And I think that's to do with trust, and I think it's to do with history, but I also think it's to do with a perceived and probably an actual lack of understanding from others that we represent a significant group that are largely ignored. And rather like the complacent, well, London will bounce back, it is, well, we've always just managed on our own, so we'll continue to manage on our own. This is unprecedented. It's a word that gets used a lot, but the current economic and financial situation and the impact on small businesses and ethnic minority businesses is completely unprecedented. And those that are property backed in particular, and those that have taken out debt, and the debt is from families and from others where there is a disproportionate amount that goes from the bank of mum and dad and family in black and ethnic minority startup businesses, as opposed to those from all white businesses and so on. All of those create disadvantages that are not recognised, not understood, and of course then not responded to.
Okay, thank you very much, Tony. So Ali, just wanted to come to Ali for a question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tony. That was a great whistle-stop tour of what's happening out there in the community. I'm Nazir Ali, a trading standards officer for Barking and Dagenham. Yes, we want to encourage small businesses to come back into the town centre. But as you know, enforcement, we are stuck in between a rock and a hard surface. We want to obviously enforce statutory regulations that will impact on small businesses, whereas the big businesses would have what is known as a primary authority relationship, where they can pay for some of the support and guidance that they can afford to have. Whereas for small businesses, this is not the case. So is there something that can be done from within your reach and your reach to government level for this sort of area to be developed, where funding and other input can be provided to local authority to support small businesses post-pandemic? As you've just said, they need it the most. So that's my question, really.
Yeah, I can answer that. I mean, frankly, and I don't represent the Central London Alliance on this call. I was asked as a representative of the Asian Business Association, which is part of the London Chamber of Commerce. But the London Chamber of Commerce is part of the Central London Alliance. And the Central London Alliance was set up over a year ago as a community interest company, specifically to help London survive and recover. There are three strands of work. One strand of work is public policy and advocacy. We'll just pass on that because this is trying to assist the government with knowledge and to make sure that they're focused on things that would help. And because this is local authority, of course, we need to be politically agnostic, and I don't want to comment on that strand of work. The second strand, which is the most important thing and that relates to your question, is business support. So in the first instance, the first thing we did was to produce a risk assessment that could be downloaded from the CLA website. So anybody can do that. Just log on, download a risk assessment, know what your risks are. That has morphed into, and you can get them accredited by Bureau Veritas. It's morphed into many other things. Whether it be air cleaning, access to PPE, information about insurance. If you want to advertise and promote your businesses, you can just log on to as an advocate on the CLA platform and be able to connect with others. Westminster Business Council, for example, are business supporters of the CLA, along with the Corporation of City of London, 12 different business improvement districts, and the London Chamber of Commerce, the Company of Entrepreneurs, and many other organisations, all of whom can provide some support or another. But you're right that there are some businesses, and if we were to just make the assumption that there's a disproportionate amount of smaller businesses which are owned by BAME owners, and the smaller businesses have been less able to confront the difficulties from the pandemic, then they probably are the ones most in need of support. I don't have that statistic, but it wouldn't surprise me. I say that wearing a slightly different hat, in that I own a sizable business, and it cannot be described as a small business, with very large investments in very large property. In fact, I'm sitting right now in what used to be the TfL headquarters, which building which I bought for a lot of money. And of course, downstairs, it's above St James Park Station. I have a number of tenants who would previously have been paying TfL rental for their shops and for their coffee bars and dry cleaners and so on, many of whom have not been able to trade effectively because they haven't had sufficient footfall, not just in the public transport system and the tubes, but also because the civil servants and around St James Park and those that they would normally be expecting to be working at their workplaces have not. So you can see from a tenant's point of view how they haven't got sufficient income to be able to support payments to their landlord, in this case me. But if I had, if I was very highly leveraged and I was having to pay my bank's capital and interest during a period when my tenants weren't paying me, we'd get into an almighty kind of problem. And in fact, that discussion is one that is being ignored, and it needs to be had. The landlords and tenants have got to be able to come to some kind of workable arrangement. The banks have got to be supportive of it, and the government have got to be supportive of that whole notion. Because if banks start foreclosing on landlords and landlords then have difficulty with their tenants because the tenants haven't been paid, then of course we're going to get into an almighty mess. So I think there is support in a way that needs to be considered, that actually has been dismissed and pushed over for another day, and they affect all of us. What we really need is for London to recover and be restored as quickly as we can, and for all the support structures, including those from local authorities, including those where they can look at business rates, including those that look at sectors that have been more disproportionately impacted, those related to travel, hospitality, those that can't work digitally and remotely. All of those need some specific targeted support in order to, because they've suffered from no fault of their own. The footfall hasn't been there. The direction has been, you must not travel. We recommend that you do not go to your workplace. These are directions which, rightly or wrongly, the government imposed. And of course, businesses have suffered as a result. And financial suffering has been part of the suffering, along with the nation's health.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Tony. It's been brilliant to kind of hear from you. Tony, I'm not sure if you're able to stick around. There are a few more comments in the chat, or just a few questions that are being posed to you, but just because we need
I'll
to
hang on as long as I can.
Brilliant.
I've been on a webinar earlier this morning, and I've got one later on as well.
Oh, right. Okay, you're in high demand. Thank you so much, Tony.
Okay, but I'll hang on as long as I can.
That was brilliant. Thank you. And thanks, colleagues. As I say, if there's any other questions specifically for Tony, as you've heard there, please drop it into the chat. Okay, so now we move on to our panel, and we have the following guests with us. So we've got Dr. Colton Brown, who's Managing Director at Marshall & Brown. And thank you, there you are, you just come on camera. We've got Professor Monda Ram, OBE, who's the Centre Director at the Centre for Research in Ethnic Minority Entrepreneurship. We've got Sibusiso Shabala, who's the COVID Business Support Coordinator at the Black Southwest Network, and Carl Nando, who's the founder at Amenity Care and BAME London lead for the Federation of Small Businesses. I know Jenny Jones was here earlier, but I think she's experiencing some difficulties with her. Let's just see. Jenny, are you there? Okay, well, Jenny Jones is the founder of Jenny Jones Training and Happiness, and is a wellbeing consultant. So if she's able to come back in, then definitely we will welcome her back to the stage. Okay, so brilliant panel. Thank you all for joining us. Please unmute. I'm just gonna come to you and just ask you a few questions. So Sibosusu, firstly, there was a report published by your network, which was around the impact of COVID-19 on BAME-led businesses, organization and communities. And there was a statistic that showed near 67% of businesses owned by those communities had closed due to COVID. I mean, just, kind of talk into that for us a little bit.
Yeah, sure. So yes, hi to all those attending. My name is Sibusiso Shawalala from Black Southwest Network. As it says, we're based in the Southwest, and we're a Black-led infrastructure organization with an overreaching intent into building independent and strong Black and Asian minority ethnic communities, businesses, and organizations within the Southwest. So this was one of the research pieces that we did.
Sibosa, so your camera is not on. I just wanted to let you know, just in case just in case you were thinking we could see you and you were smiling at us. We can't see you.
Oh yeah, I was smiling at you. I thought that it was on. There you go. Is that right? I can see myself, so it must mean it's on.
Okay, so maybe it's coming.
I can't see. I can't see it.
Yeah, it's still.
I can see he just showed up briefly and it's gone off again.
Maybe you clicked it and clicked off. And we can't control that. There you are. We can see you.
Tony here, and I can see you.
Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant.
You've gone off again.
I can see myself.
Yes, there you are. There you are.
You're on now. I can see you.
Okay, cool. Brilliant. Thank you. So yeah, the research piece that you're referring to is one that we did during lockdown, and the businesses that had closed was about between 67% of businesses. What we managed to do in terms of working with local authority and through the COVID response role was to be able to understand from local authority how many Black businesses that we have on our database are currently getting any of the ARG grants or have any of the business rates, have actually been receiving any of the business rates discounts. And immediately when we see that the numbers are not matching the businesses that we have on our database, doesn't mean that we have a lot or have all the Black and Asian businesses on our database. But if the percentage of businesses that we have aren't getting any of this funding, then we know that we need to make sure that the council can be a little bit more agile in how it distributes those funding, those funds. And then it became a key role in making sure that we have a direct outreach, both on social media, hosting events, and actually, going out into the streets. That was part of my role, was just going out to making sure that I can identify businesses, get emails, get contact details, and up to now, we have engaged about 148 individual businesses with 170 different types of engagement from those businesses, giving them at least between 3 to 4 different levels of engagement. And we've come out with 4 programs from this different engagement. So we have a program that focuses on getting, it's called Make It Work. It's got 16 organizations in it. This program focuses on increasing diversity within the supply chain of the NHS and Bristol City Council so that they can have a diverse service provision for those doing adult social care. So it's really focused on procurement within the adult social care focus. We then also have another program that's focused on social enterprises specifically, so that we can work with Social Enterprise UK, work with the voluntary sector organizations to get them trading, because as you know, social enterprises need to be 50% trade. And a lot of the social enterprises really were hit hard with the elements of being of trading. So this social enterprise program has also got 16 to 18 businesses involved, and we're helping them with a business model and also accessing social investment. And then we have, we had a women in business program that mainly focuses only on women, to be able to address some of the issues that Tony had raised in terms of access to investments, because we see that there's less than 0.6% that goes to women-led businesses. So that's been some of the things that we've done through that. So I really like your title when you're saying vision and minority-led businesses, right? So we had to see that from our small data, organizations are not getting access to all of these funds. But then how do we help them to get access to funds? How do I identify their priority needs? And then how do we provide those tailored programs that addresses those needs that the businesses have had. So since then, our database has literally just increased by at least 45, if not 60%. And we're not at the end of the program. Our program is running till the end of December.
Wow. Wow, seems like lots kind of happening up there. In the southwest, and you mentioned something, and maybe kind of more generally as a panel, we can kind of come back to this when we go into more general questions. But there's something about the intersectionality as well. So we've been speaking about ethnicity, but when that kind of crosses with gender, you spoke about women business owners. Is there, is there a cumulative effect to the kind of impacts, I suppose, from that we have seen, kind of from COVID on businesses as well. So, but
yeah, absolutely. I think this goes back to what Tony was saying in terms of the rise of entrepreneurship, because of the rise of levels of inequality. We're definitely seeing that. And in terms of what data is showing us is that women-led businesses are probably about 70% most likely to be formal businesses, so registered on Companies House, a business bank accounts, they've got the constitution and they're ready to go. But when we actually engage more with male-run businesses, what we find is that they are more informal. What I mean by informal is that they are probably unincorporated, sole traders, and majority are trade as businesses. So when it comes to the impact on COVID, is that most likely they were not able to be on the fellow scheme because many didn't run payroll. And then equally in terms of some of the other programs, the self-employed income support scheme, many did not actually report a profit. So they were also not eligible to that. They ended up only being eligible to universal credit. But yet when you look at female-run businesses, their staff could be on the fellow scheme because they ran payroll. They could access the bounce back loan because of either reporting more for profit and so forth. So there was an interesting difference in terms of male and female-led businesses. Also in terms of visibility online, in terms of social media and having a website. When you're actually looking for businesses online, when we're doing research, desk research, you can find more female-led businesses online as opposed to male-run businesses. So it's really been interesting to see in terms of female-led or male-led businesses what the differences are. And then also once you start to look at the ethnicity and profitability and scale of businesses, and even sector, you also then start to see a stark difference in terms of those that are in construction, those that are in catering, those that are in security. You also then start to see quite a stark difference in terms of businesses now, and obviously market opportunity for those businesses, and also those that are both digital and those that are very traditional, non-digital, and how you can actually support businesses that are not digital when you need emails to be able to apply for these funds, and businesses that have never applied for funding before are having to fill in forms and do applications. That's been a huge barrier for some that have been without use of IT in a way. So it's been very interesting, really.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's been really useful. So I'm just going to move on now in the hope that we can then have our kind of more collective conversation. But Carl, let me come to you. So, and in your work with, kind of small to medium sized businesses and stuff, how do you see with all the statistics that's been quoted, the work that's happening up there in Bristol, what about the morale of the business owners who identify as being from a Black, Asian or multiple ethnic background? Where are we, in terms of that?
Really good question. It's a hard question, I think, because to summarize, it's quite challenging for everyone to kind of find where they are. So just to set the scene, I'm a member of the Federation of Small Business and set up a group for the reasons that you just mentioned, which is we're struggling to find some support really, and to have the sort of mentoring and training that's required. And I think just I've got a company called Immediate Care, and it's literally for me was about joining the group Federation of Small Business to have the support. Didn't know where to go. Okay, looking at the costs, what can I get for my membership? and how can that help me with my business in a nutshell. And whilst in the Federation of Small Business, which is a great platform to provide support and services at a cost that is probably fair to say acceptable, was one of my reasons. But what it was missing was a group of people that can understand my background and the challenges of what it is, as Tony kind of summarised. So we created a networking group, of which we've got quite a few members now. And that's really to have a safe place to have a conversation and get the support that's needed. And to create that hub of people that can develop their business and their skills, but provide the support. So have the right people in the room, understand the problems and the challenges. Feel free to not be scrutinized in a way that sometimes can hold you back, and just have real talk. And we've discussed things because of the concerns around filling out data, because of the concerns about information and time wasting just to tick a box, but actually not drive the change that we want to talk about. To talk about things such as race in the workplace, let alone the community, without being judged. To talk about things around workshops that we really, really need, as it's really been outlined. I think it's fragmented, that's probably what I say, and it's about being cohesive and collective together with a support without being scrutinized for what we say. In other words, stepping on eggshells. So for me, I think we found a bit more of a consistency of a group of people that really kind of understand what we need, and to feel comfortable to be in a room to talk about the real challenges where we know we need allies, but we also know we want to drive change. So I would say at this moment in time, it's, for me personally, there's a lot more hope compared to where there was before. I think it's so needed now, and unfortunately with all the issues that's been outlined, George Floyd and the fact the economy, we're on our knees and we have to come together. But the reality speaking is, financially, we want to be financially better off with the freedom and space. And I think, you know, with that creates opportunity to have a collective team. I found being in this room probably a godsend, I'll be honest with you, with the Federation. And I say it because the Federation, as we know, is 240,000 members. Okay, how many people sitting at the top in terms of colour? How do we drive this change? So for me, it was about having a seat at the table to drive change. And yes, we can have these situations where sometimes we're not heard and we're used, and we see it. But as a collective group, having a steering group of people that are professional qualified, give us a bit more control, not control, a bit more input to drive that change, as opposed to on our own. And you've mentioned that this has been entrepreneur value for vision. It's a great headliner, as long as it moves us forward in a way that is productive. Otherwise, it's a great headliner that doesn't do anything. And I don't mean in that way. I'm on this because it came about by coincidence. I didn't know where to go. It came through the Federation of Small Business. Did it come to me directly? No, it didn't. It came about by coincidence. I jumped on a call to you and said, it's a call I need to be on. The same thing as the Federation, to look at the challenges around some of the policies, particularly around health, disability. What about Black disability? It's even worse in terms of the support it's getting, in terms of, you said, intersectionality, you know, women's rights, all of those factors. All of those factors is what my business is the principles of. What Tony mentioned was about honesty, transparency, and being open. All of those factors is part of the business principles about amenity care. Most of the people that I've come across in this room are people that I've taken time to have the one-to-ones and found that they've got similar visions and challenges. Actually, most of those members are part of the amenity care business model. So this is about providing the mentor. It is about providing the training. It's about giving them an opportunity to improve their business with a virtual team and supportive team where it makes us all working for the same thing around care, around changing policy, improving policy, and taking control and spending the money amongst the people that understand the challenges of business. So I won't say no more than that, apart from, the platform is there. I think we are growing the platform. I've got Sabrina, who's on this call as well. She's an EDI expert and is looking at the equality and diversity element of it, because it does need key people to drive those changes around the strategy, but also to put into place some policies to make sure there are no gaps that things can fall through, because as we know, local authorities and so forth, it's great for the people at the top looking at the management position, but what about the people on the ground that's actually doing the work? It needs to have a combination of both to understand, and I think when you've got that, it makes it a bit easier. So it is about having the key stakeholders, it is about having the right influences, and it is about being completely joined up. So I'll put my hand up to Tony's overview and the data around what he's trying to pull together. I'll reach out to Tony to see where I can help, vice versa, because if I look at it, great being with the Federation of Small Business, it's no good if Amenity Care ain't growing to help the people that want to drive the change and bring them to table to drive it. It's the only way it can go. It's having those, It's having low-hanging fruit that ticks the boxes for all the things we want. When you get that, and when we've got it, help it, it makes it easy to drive change and give people hope. So at this moment, the group is great. It's got a lot of people that hope and want to drive change. What's great is I've got a business that does the same thing. So it complements each other.
Yeah, it's aligned. Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carl. And again, I know there's some questions in the chat, but I'm going to go around the panel and then we can kind of come back together to deal with those questions. So please, colleagues, keep the questions coming. I'm just going to move on now to Professor Ram. Hi, Wanda. So your team is currently working on a project kind of entitled The Evolution of Business Support for Minority Entrepreneurs. And I think a useful segue from Carl's kind of intro. And I suppose you can see where the successes and the mistakes have been made. So this is quite a pivotal time. I mean, Tony said we can't say we're post-pandemic yet. We're still in the throes of it. In fact, some might say, heading towards, but anyway, we won't be negative. So, so much action is kind of happening. How can we ensure that we don't make, or that the same mistakes, kind of in policy are not kind of repeated, that again kind of impact on businesses? I just wondered any insights from the projects that you're working on. You're just muted at the moment.
Thank you very much
Brilliant.
for inviting me to the panel, and it's been a pleasure to sort of learn from the insights of the colleagues who have spoken before me. You've made a lot of really important points. You made the point that there's a lot happening. I think what we've heard is there's a really great, very localized initiatives undertaken by spirited individuals and organizations. I don't think there's a lot happening in terms of the policy arena. I think at a national level, in terms of policy, you look hard for it, and I don't find it. So if I was to, I've got this one simple question: who owns the Black and ethnic minority business policy agenda at a national level? When I normally ask that question in policy circles, the reaction I get is stunned silence, because there isn't an obvious answer. If you ask that question at a regional level, often you get the same. There are great organizations, and we've heard from a couple already on this call, and they're doing great work. I've always been of the view that we can talk about the exceptional qualities of Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs, and they are huge, right? But we shouldn't be content to talk about them as separate from the mainstream. Black and minority entrepreneurs are driving innovation, they're driving growth, they're driving international trade. Why aren't at the heart of the policy, the entrepreneurship policy agenda, and not just tacked on at the end. I mean, we did a piece of work for the Federation of Small Businesses called Unlocking Opportunity. It was the largest ever study published last year. And there's a whole heap of issues that we talked about, but 3 points that really get recognized. Black and ethnic minority businesses are more innovative than the white counterparts. They're more likely to grow, and they're more likely to have growth aspirations, right? Fact, not lobby group rhetoric, fact. But where is that point? Where are those points in the leveling up agenda? Where are those points in the inclusive growth agenda? Where are those points in the mainstream entrepreneurship agenda? There aren't. So how can you talk about leveling up when you when you really ignore diversity? So that's my big problem, and that's the challenge I think that we need to address. We will publish later on this year the largest ever analysis of Black and ethnic minority entrepreneurship in the UK, and what we've also done is compare our country with the situation in Europe, the US, and Canada. And I've been an academic looking at this one subject for 30 odd years, so I've been here with different evolutions and different parts of the policy journey, as it were. Yeah, and today I think you can accurately sort of categorize the situation like this in terms of the UK. There's an absence of national direction, right? The policy initiatives that we do have are fragmented, poorly funded, short term. Very rarely do they figure on the agendas of LEPs, growth hubs, etc. Very rarely are Black and ethnic minorities in positions where they can actually influence the governance and ownership of initiatives. We talk a lot about access to finance. We should actually be talking a little more about who owns the finance rather than who has access to it. And so I see the successes, and I think we need to articulate them in a much more compelling way. But there are huge challenges, and my fear is that the brilliant work of colleagues on this panel and others who have really been, I think, carrying the light in times of darkness. They shouldn't be isolated. They shouldn't be individualized actions. We need to make sure that what we talk about is at the heart of those policy debates. I think the challenge to us is to ensure that it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Powerful words there, and just kind of, I think those 3 points that you made about businesses and to be absent from the kind of policy when yeah. Okay, so thank you again very much. Okay, so finally I come to Dr. Colton Brown, and Colton has written extensively on around engagement with Black businesses. So Colton, oh, there you are. So Colton, there's a lot of talk, and I think I think Monda just said, that there's so much going on. There's localized support for these businesses. We've heard from Carl, in terms of how he's supporting and through his organization, but actually there's an absence in kind of maybe policy, and people are falling through. Sibu Siso made mention that funding is not, kind of going, to some of those businesses. So how do we better engage those entrepreneurs to in terms of support, and what should that support look like, I suppose?
Okay.
Thank you, Serena. So, Serena, it's a complex issue. It is. I wish it was straightforward and I can give you a standard answer. And Professor Ram, in fact, I read the FSB report which you conducted 2020 last year, and one of the things it said at the very beginning was that structural inequality still exists. That was one of the premises at the start of that report from the FSB themselves. But Professor Ram has also done some work around with MSD UK in 2012. And there's a perception, and it was called the Impact Assessment Report, which talks about the perception of black and minority businesses and the perception that the corporate environment have about us as a business owners in the first instance. And 36% of their corporate members said, actually, we think there's a disparity, or we don't think some of these businesses are good enough, or they're slightly behind other industries or other expectations in terms of how the quality that we would want to provide. Now, I've just come on the back of finishing off a report, which is going to be published in October. It's called the Black Entrepreneur Report 2021, which focused specifically on the supply chain and how do black and ethnic minority businesses engage within the public and private sector. But the focus specifically was on the Black African Caribbean diaspora, as opposed to the homogenization of BAME, because I think the lived experiences of different ethnicities are very much different, and therefore you cannot just contextualize them in the same context. So, but in trying to address some of your questions, I think there's a paradox which exists. So I think organizations understand there are things they should be doing. So we have policies. We have regulations, we have rules in some cases, and we say these are the things that you want to do, or whether it's under corporate social responsibility, whether that's on a diversity committees and engagement. So there's a narrative, there's a discourse going on, and people understand that there are inequalities, whether that's access to finance or social capital or mentoring, because all of these come out in the report which we're due to publish, and it says that those inequalities still exist. Organization then claim, we want to do something more about it. But when you start to measure and look at the matrix of, funding or training or mentoring, the disparity hasn't changed. The numbers, there's an old adage that says what doesn't get measured doesn't get done. But when you start to measure stuff and you look at the number, the reality is actually there's not a lot to change. So there's a paradox going on. So what can you do differently? So let's just take local government, for example, or the natural procurement process. So you and I could go in for a tender, and we have to complete a pre-qualification questionnaire, which will require a business, an SME, a diversity business, to be able to demonstrate they're able to tick various qualification questions, such as, have you had an experience of dealing with local government before? No. Have you had a turnover of 5 million? No. The consequence of some of the pre-qualifications structurally will then prohibit that same individual from having access to a potential opportunity. Now, when I worked in the corporate world for 20 years, if I'm standing behind my corporate name, I get access to that opportunity because A, we have the resources, but we also have the brand and the resources behind us. But I stand up as Dr. Colton Brown offering the same service, I have a different challenge. So what am I saying here is that organizations and institutions sometimes have difficulty in reconciling that. So I think we need to start to think about the solutions. We have to be solution-led. So, for example, local government say, well, we're risk averse. We want to mitigate risk, and therefore we can use the sort of tier one suppliers because A, they know what to do and what to say and how to say it. And of course, they've done it before. So what you then have is this perpetual cycle of key players winning tenders on an ongoing basis for mentoring, for coaching, for whatever it might be that they need. So the new face in the industry doesn't get that access to that particular opportunity. But could the local government say, actually, as part of our diversity and engagement strategy, we would like you to ensure that there's a percentage of your business which are becoming BAME. Now, there's got to be a caveat. The caveat has to be, they've got to be fit for purpose. There's no point employing someone that they can't deliver the job. So the caveat has to be there. But nothing appears to be changing in that sense. Tier one suppliers continue to get access to opportunities, and there's no filtering down despite the narrative. So that we have to start to look at how do we dissect this, looking at it differently. Of course, I mean, Professor Ram said the same thing. Look, there has to be some elements of policy. Also, there has to be a different looks about the decision-making process. Is who's part of that narrative making decisions? Because sometimes the individuals who are sitting there sometimes become the unwitting actors who continue to perpetuate the narrative. They don't actually realize they're doing it. Yes, it could be because they've got biases. It could be because actually the structural, cultural nuance of the organization is so structured in such a way that it makes it difficult for them to navigate a different path. But if you've got a different voice sitting at that table, that can help them access different ways of thinking, different ways of doing something. It may lead to a different outcome. So whilst it's complex, as I said, it's a multifaceted approach which is going to be taken. And, you know, Serena, we're happy to share the report with you when it comes out. But I think there's a lot to do, but it's going to start having a shift in mindset, a shift in policy, and people have a more progressive mindset and attitude towards delivering different solutions. Because the litmus test is simple. When you say look at your business and look at all the local governments, in the last 5 years, in terms of your supply chain, what percentage of your business, in terms of value and by number, has been given to the right businesses from diversity backgrounds? And if the number hasn't changed, you've got to ask yourself the question, well, why hasn't it changed? Questions such as, when we advertise for an opportunity, where do we advertise? What's our communication channels like? Do we advertise in the Voice newspaper, for example? You know, there are things that they can look at doing, which sometimes clearly they don't do. But the evidence is clear. There's a disparity. It still exists within the African and Caribbean and the diversity community. And if we want structural change, we need to look at what we're doing and how we're delivering upon that. Because, as I said, there's a lack of social capital, access to opportunities, people and resources. Access to finance. With any business, you need access to finance. And one of the things that Sage said, that businesses that have access to good mentorship and good training and coaching are more likely to succeed than those businesses which don't have them. And in the African Caribbean diaspora, we are less likely to have access to that. It doesn't mean it doesn't exist and people don't have access to those opportunities, but they're less inclined to have that. And the evidence in terms of the data that we've come out with in our Black Entrepreneur 2021 report supports that notion as well. So we need to be able to understand what the challenges are and then generally trying to come up with real pragmatic solutions that create real change and not just having this potential illusion of inclusion and having this paradox which says, I understand we need to do something, but the reality is we don't actually do it. And then you're just left with this perpetual circle of very much of the same thing. So that's my take on it at the moment.
Colton, thank you so much. And you know, and I think it's a brilliant challenge out to local authorities, and you know, they will make up the most in terms of the audience here. You know, if the number of Black-owned businesses, or you know, Black, Asian, or multiple ethnic-owned businesses has not increased since you've had a renewed focus on diversity and inclusion, then you know, where are we? Because that has to be, you know, that's the objective. So that's how we have to kind of measure success. If you're not engaging more of those businesses, or those businesses are being able to benefit from the tenders, and I know you spoke, and we have many conversations in our procurement team in Westminster about, you know, the pre-qualification questionnaire. You know, do you have £2 million worth of insurance? No. Okay, bye. You know, yeah. So it's looking at, and I think what you know, there's got to be, and you kind of made mention of, you know, maybe a commitment around a percentage of tenders. You know, we might see contracts ranging from kind of smaller ones to the kind of massive, you know, I lead on a regeneration scheme, so you know, you're talking in the hundreds of millions. You know, what we have to make an overt commitment to kind of seeing an increase in terms of those being able to benefit from our tenders and doing business with us. So I think that was a brilliant challenge, and I think it speaks back to Carl said, you know, is this a talking shop? That's what I heard from you, Carl. And I want to say to you, the Pan London Council Forum, we, you know, right from inception, we said, listen, this is not about, it's brilliant to come together and to speak and to be edified actually by one another and to get that injection of energy to move us forward. But this is about action. It's about action for our staff. It's about action for our communities. So I want you to rest assured. And if Lord Simon Woolley, who's our kind of key patron, was here, he, you know, he challenges us. He says, Westminster, redouble your efforts all the time. So we take that challenge seriously. But look, thank you so much. There's a few questions in the chat. I'm going to bring in Maureen. I feel like Maureen is someone I know from way back when. I'm going to bring in Maureen, and then I'm going to come to a question that I've seen my colleague Frank. Oh, it's Maureen. Hi.
Hi, Serena. Thank you so much, as always, for bringing us together. Really, really inspired by the speakers this afternoon. And in response to what has been said about being really practical and taking this forward, just wondering whether there is a community of practice that already exists, and also another thought about coaching. So I work in the health arena, and there is so much information and knowledge that I can share with regards to the care industry, for example, for people with mental health issues. So it's just about making those connections and links, and just wondering whether we need to establish some sort of glossary. How do we make ourselves known, and how do we get to know other people, I guess, going forward? Thanks.
Brilliant. Thanks, Maureen. So yeah, about the networks there, really. I don't know if anybody wants to jump in on that one.
I'll jump in on that one. Maureen, talk about timing. Mental health and well-being, big area of focus for me, particularly as community care talks about care. So it's about independence. It's about having that care at home to start off with. How can you get out into the working world? Well-being, I have a team of people looking at well-being, covering the mental health right the way through. Looking for a coach is about engagement. It's about men, fathers and sons, mothers and daughters. It's about the elders, covering all the elements around, well, the holistic element around well-being. So my take on that is it's more important now than ever. And unless we get that right, we can't get the economy right, and we can't get all the other elements right. That part of it is the first place to start, in line with some of the others.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, Carl. And of course, we will, you know, as per normal, once we have completed this conference, we kind of collate all of the messages in the chat, etc., etc. And so if there is a call for kind of contact information to be swapped, we can also facilitate that if people are happy. And we also have another plug for our knowledge hub, as you know, our space, our online space, where we can just kind of use that to share in information and to kind of keep that network going in between. Okay, yeah. Sorry, go on.
Yeah, just wanted to come to expand on what Maureen is saying, and Dr. Colton and Ram there. So the reason that we had a clear intention on supporting Black and Asian organizations to develop better capacity in what they deliver is because when we ran a program in partnership with Social Enterprise UK, called, which is about getting social enterprises into procurement. What we found is that the buyers, and the buyers sent us the catalog of spend, then we could analyze and see the diversity of spend. We could then help them to compartmentalize how much they could put aside for small organizations that are not used to procurement, so that they can test and learn and get used to it. What we found is that the capacity of delivery was not as high, and especially when you look at the sectors that the businesses provide services in, was not always the same as what the four buyers that we had would always want to buy in. So we had a mismatch in terms of sector and goodwill.
Okay.
So in order to actually bring back the program, what we need to do is to develop the sector so that businesses are ready to be able to scale and deliver should they win one of those contracts. Not a situation where, for example, you have a solo entrepreneur who has a great concept, wants to set up a cleaning company, but then from a sole trader, starts a company, and then 2 months later, they want to enter into procurement. Now, that is possible, but you'd need to have a lot of infrastructure in place before even getting the money first. You know what I mean? So it's also like we're not crushing people's reality. What we're trying to do is make sure that for the large buyers, we actually are also bringing organizations that are ready to deliver. Because if we start the relationship and we're playing favoritism, like, yeah, great, go, we're going to mess up with the corporates that really have an intention of really buying. So we need to also be conscious of the level of delivery and scale of organizations that can deliver to those services. So that's why, what we're finding is that many organizations are either having to choose if they want to be more in the informal sector or they want to be on the formal sector. And depending on which one you choose is going to depend on your market in itself. So what we're working on in terms of network is that for the organizations that we're working with in the different programs, and for those that are not in our programs, is also to make sure that when we start to have the meet the buyer events, where those large corporates come into the space and they say, we want to buy film, someone who can come and do some film, want to buy waste or catering or this, that we have organizations that are then saying, we are ready or I'm ready. And there's a badging system to say, this organization is a startup, but they could pitch. If you want to hear from a startup, this organization is a scale up. You want to hear from a scale up. This organization has already got a contract, or and they want to grow in what they're doing. Either it's health and social care, or it's transport, or it's catering, or it's security, whatever the case may be. I think that the corporates, as you're saying about corporate social responsibility and ethical, all of those things are there and they're pushing towards it. But do we have the market there? Do we have the data to say that we've got all of those businesses in our CRM so that we know exactly what those businesses want? So I this has been really pushed a lot by Diane, part of the Crown Service, who's part of the voluntary sector. I forgot her surname, but the Diane.
You're not helping.
Yeah. Who's? Yeah, no. I forgot her name. She's the Crown rep for the voluntary sector organizations, and she's been really pushing this in terms of the procurement stuff. And we saw this. This started on when Theresa May did her procurement little stuff with organizations that were never on the procurement list, and she bought from a small organization to say that they can do all the shipments for Brexit. It started right there. Claire Dove, that's her name, Claire Dove. And another procurement organization, which is that manages the TOMS framework. And they do that for local authorities. But what they do is they implement the social value policy. So our quick win has been, let's get organizations involved in social value, right? From social value, let's get involved in procurement. So therefore, our relationship with local authority has been that from research to program, we can show the evidence, we can show the appetite, test with private sector, test with private sector again, develop the sector so that, when it comes to diversity and economic inclusion, it is about contracts. And if we're not, and we saw this in South Africa, right? 20 years ago, South Africa started Black economic empowerment. If you wanted to tender with any local authority or government, you needed to have X Black CEOs or this as your quota, otherwise you didn't get in. But yet we haven't seen any of that radical economic distribution within the UK, and they could have learned from many other countries, as Dr. Colton has said. They could have learned from many other countries about how to support or to improve equalities in the UK. But yet again, as we said about policy, it is not something that they've been very intentional about addressing it within the procurement remit, So it's always soft touches about environmental justice and this, but never any issues about equality. So as Mr. Ram said, who is really leading the agenda? nationally about this is key, because that's then where we all come together to address issues about procurement in the UK, because that's where it is. If we're going to be talking about grants and investment, that's one thing. But contracts is where we all trade, and we can do apprenticeships, we can do, it's trade. That's where it's at. So it's really exciting to be part of this, and to hear that actually all the speakers, we're on the same page. That's amazing.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And I'm conscious I've got Monde and Colton there, but please just bear with me, because we have another speaker, Deborah Millington. Michaela, is Deborah?
I'm here.
Oh, hi Deborah. Hi. I'm so conscious that the panel, I'm normally so good at timekeeping, right? Yeah, of course I am. But Deborah, come on. But it was brilliant to just hear, actually, and we just let the panel go on a bit longer. But Deborah, really conscious that you're going to come and give that kind of local authority flavor. And I know your time is reduced now. Are you good to go?
Yeah, I'm good to go. I'll try and cut it down, actually. And I think a lot what's been said by both Tony and also the panel pretty much resonates with the work that we're certainly doing at our end. And it is early stages, but we are working working towards that. So I don't know if you're showing my slide, but I'm going to cut.
We can't see you at the moment, just so that you know, Deborah.
What can you see? Sorry, can you see me?
No, I don't know if I've.
I can see
you.
Oh, you can see. It's only my computer. Don't
you.
worry. I think it's been playing up all
Thanks
day.
for putting the camera on.
Okay, cool. So I don't know if you can see my slide, but I'm going to pretty much skip the first two bits, because I think the third bit, where I'm talking more about the work I'm doing with engagement, listening and undertaking, I'll be able to introduce myself through there. But
I can't see any slides.
Okay, Michaela, can you switch through the next slide, or is it Serena's face still on? It's literally just one slide, but if you can't see it, it's not a big deal. Okay, cool. So basically what the slide was, it was just an outline of how I was going to present to you today. So the first bit was just a bit of introduction about myself, and I work for a local authority, Tower Hamlets Council. Do not shoot me. But we do a lot of work for small businesses, and we did prior to the pandemic, but the pandemic has certainly exacerbated that. And it's also provided quite a few opportunities for us as a local authority to engage with our business community and really see what the impact of, as us as a local authority, has on them. But equally, what we're able to really delve deep into is specifically micro businesses. And then once you go into micro businesses, it's about those smaller groups that sit within those that actually have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic, but also prior to that as well, and looking at how we can really address that. On the back of that, I've taken up a number of roles, and one of those was as part of this BAME Pan-London network, the lead on the economic recovery. Because as a local authority, Tower Hamlets, which is one of the most diverse boroughs in London, we're seeing that actually the support that the government announced through the COVID recovery wasn't actually hitting a lot of those communities and a lot of those households and those residents and those business owners. So we really wanted to understand what does that look like at a real tangible action level, and how we as officers, agents of the local economy, can really support them. And we did so by trying to really understand what support they actually needed. But on the back of that, recognizing that sometimes policies and processes take longer to implement. So how can we have those quick fixes? What can we do right now to actually help them to access the support to respond to the current pandemic? And then look at them in terms of a longer term vision and with developing projects with real impact. So as part of the BAME, one of the ways that we've been able to capture that information is through the BAME London Network Economic Recovery Group. And that's a group that we have a meeting on a monthly basis, and we invite business leaders within the community from the Black and Asian minority ethnic community to come along and talk about not just their challenges, but the work that they've been doing and how they've been able to navigate this space. but also we use it as an opportunity to spotlight them, to tell us what their actual problems are. So then that then feeds into us taking back, number one, we're introducing them to other local authorities. So these are like suppliers, and we've got buyers. And sometimes, I think Dr. Colton mentioned it, is that social capital. And sometimes they just don't know who to connect with within the council. And to be honest, it's officers of me. This isn't necessarily policy. This is officers that have access to funds to procure services. And really, it's about us being able to build on those relationships and know what the businesses are actually out there. So we use this as a platform really to start unearthing Black and Asian minority ethnic businesses, to bring them to the fore, and then introduce them to our wider network and work closely with them through access to opportunities, and whether that is financially capital-led opportunities, whether that's grants or contracts, but also with regards to being at the table when you are engaging and these projects have been scoped. Because we recognise, and I think it was either Professor Ram or Tony at the beginning that mentioned that, you know, engagement is one thing, but actually the chunk of the money or expenditure is done through the delivery. And why isn't it that Black and Asian minority ethnic businesses or BAME businesses aren't part of that process, but then they're expected to be at the end where it's the beneficiaries, when all the knowledge that they've got could actually serve the wider population through the delivery of services. And it's how do we really look at how do we readdress that? But understanding that, you know, policies do take time, but, you know, there are quick wins, as they say, and it's not a terminology I like, but it's something that we try to do. So some of the takeaways that once we were listening to the businesses that come to our monthly meeting, some of the key things that came out of it. So early engagement, project design and scoping, remuneration for time and brain picking exercises. And I think that's so important because essentially that's intellectual property. You know, 15, 20 minutes, that's a chat. Anything more is really a consultation. So we should really be factoring this in when local authorities in general should be factoring this in when you are engaging with businesses, because especially from the Black and Asian minority community, because they're usually quite time poor. Come along and to give you all this knowledge for them only to be maybe a beneficiary at best really doesn't seem quite equitable and fair. So let's really look at what that looks like in a real practical sense. A number of your panel mentioned access to supply chain opportunities, and there's a number of stages with regards to that. There's the knowledge about what are these programs, when are they coming out, what are the criteria, and who sets that. And it's been at that table to discuss those opportunities very early on when these things are coming through the conceptualization. And I always encourage people to read their local plans. The local plans essentially tells you what a local authority has got for you, plans for you within the next 10 years or 5 years or whatever it is, or their strategy. And then once you see what that looks like on an economic level, connect with those local authorities and say, what programs are you running to achieve these objectives? And then almost work backwards and say, well, I want to be part of that conversation when these are scoping. I want to be part, and you do have to be proactive. Other communities I know, well, they're aware of this. And so there is an element of proactivity if you want to be ahead of the curve, but equally that shouldn't necessarily be the case. But these are hacks potentially to work around it. And then one of the other things is that looking at, and I think it was Ram that mentioned, and Professor Ram that mentioned about supply chain opportunities, especially social value. And it is about building the capacity specifically of micro businesses, actually, in terms of, yes, it's good that they can have access to it, but sometimes you can set business up for a fail if they don't have the capacity to deliver. And one of the things as a officer within the local authority who designs programs is looking at how do we quality assure the work that we are commissioning and we are providing to our business community. So there's an element of that we're helping them start, potentially helping them grow, but where are the actual tangible opportunities and what do they look like and how can we create that space for them? And within that, how can we make sure that those opportunities are accessible for all? And a lot of that work is going to be started to be done through our social value. That's merely switching it on its head and looking in terms of businesses who possibly don't have that have a limited level of delivery or experience, but have got the capacity to deliver. And it's about opening up those RFQs, so those requests for quotation opportunities. So whereas you're only, as an officer, we only necessarily have to go to one, actually, why don't we go to two? Make that process a bit more competitive, and then extend that through with including diversity along the way as well. So there's lots of work that as a local authority we've started to do, and we have started, especially with the social value, and we're building capacities of micro businesses and smaller and community-led businesses so that they can access these opportunities to start building up a picture of these businesses, so that we can then say to our colleagues in other departments or other buyers to say, look, have you considered those? And we see it as within business support, we see that essentially as our responsibility to be able to create that picture, which includes feedback from other teams or other businesses that they've worked with, to really just start tabling these businesses for opportunities. Some of the other things that came out through the engagement with Black-owned business and Black and Asian-owned businesses was the amount of time in order to respond to a contract. By the time they've seen it, which is usually at the 11th hour, they've got very little time to respond, ask any questions. So how are we communicating these opportunities? Are we actually using some form of mass media platform, which has its own accessibility issues, but are we going directly to those mediums that our community is actually reading and or engaging with? So there is a lot of work that we have started doing, and then personally I've started to embed it in programs of work that I'm doing as well. And then one of the final points, I didn't want to reiterate a lot what everyone else has said, but increased opportunity for social capital. We know, unfortunately, we live in a world where nepotism does exist, but also in terms of isn't what you know, sometimes it's who you know and who has sights of these opportunities, and how can we ensure that these BAME community business owners have that have those mentorships, have access to people, so at least their names can be mentioned in spaces where these opportunities exist. So one of the other things that we are doing from our end is we're giving businesses the opportunity to have visibility, and that's through partnership working with us. And so that could be sometimes through remunerated partnerships, or it could be through access to our networks. And so we're looking at what does that look like for businesses, and where do they see this as possibly as part of their marketing, or does it sit within their revenue generating aspect of their business, but not necessarily two or one exclusive of each other, because a marketing opportunity could lead to obviously sales opportunity as well. But it's really being flexible with our business community across the board, but also within that, specifically targeting more community-led groups who communicate directly with those communities, because as a local authority, we have a huge amount of reputational damage to improve. There's a lot of distrust, and it's how do we start to demystify that? And one of the ways is actually communicating with people who they communicate with, communicate through the mediums that they use, to not only just meet them halfway, but sometimes having to go far and beyond to pull them in and create pathways and pipelines for them to see this is a safe place for us to work with them to help develop their business. So and ultimately what we're aiming to do is influence policies. And one of the ways we're able to do that is by seeing where best practice lies, and where once we have supported a business through this process, well, actually, if it works, how do we then make that into policy? And there's a couple of ways. First, we share it within platforms like this. We share it to far and wide, whether it's like London councils or other organisations that we have access to. But also because we are party to communications when policies are being developed, actually, we've got tried and tested models that we can say, well, this works. Why isn't this part of the policy? So sometimes it's trying to articulate what the policy is harder than you might as well just get on and do it and then show, well, these are the results from it. Let's build on it, because from our perspective, numbers speak to council, to our senior council officers and our senior members of the team in terms of what are our outputs. So if we can demonstrate quality as well as quantity, then that's a win-win. But then the added bit to that is ensuring that we have really good case studies that can then feed into the policies, and which will then essentially affect change. Because what we don't want are these, you know, tick boxes or nice to have programs, or we did this. You know, a BAME business isn't just for Christmas or for whenever there is a pandemic, it's for life, right? So it's how do we make sure that these things stick and carry on through the golden thread of business support. So just a snapshot of what we are doing as a local authority. So our business support really looks at inclusive growth and a recovery program to build sustainable businesses. And so when we talk about sustainable, that word has been used with regards to the net zero, but actually we're talking about sustainable businesses that, you know, pay people a fair wage, that invest in their talent, looks after their local community, all of those little things that builds a sustainable community. That then ultimately, if we ever come into a scenario like a pandemic, something else like this again, hopefully we don't, but actually they're not operating from a position of fear because they already have an infrastructure in place that they can work collaboratively with each other. They know how to actually assemble themselves and work collaboratively. And we've seen that over the past, especially at the early stages of the pandemic, how people come together. So how can we capitalize upon that while still delivering business support, good services, and making sure that we are communicating and everyone is able to access the opportunities that they need in order for them to grow. And so we're doing that through our communications, keeping businesses up to date through a myriad of ways, through our newsletters that we do. And one of the things that we have been able to do, and I think as a team, we almost see ourselves as we're very entrepreneurial, I think, in our team. And how we look at it is that we're never going to have this opportunity again where businesses are coming to us, because very often than not, we have to go to them. And so our newsletter, just in terms of numbers, it went from 2,000 prior to pandemic to nearly over 7,000. And that was very much on the basis of businesses coming to us. So we see that we're now visible. So how can we use that visibility to really communicate effectively to them as a whole? And collaborations, we talked about that, and what does that look like? So work that we're doing, how can we collaborate with businesses? Introductions to relevant teams, that's such a quick win. And we see that very much part of our customer service, actually, that rather than them having to go on a website and going all around the houses, how can we shortcut that process so that they can connect to the person who makes those decisions, to that team that can maybe give them some clear directions on how they need to develop their proposal, their business, or where they can be signposted to. You mentioned engagement pre-project planning, that's vital. Marketing promote through communication channels, so whether that's our masterclasses or weekly updates. Supply chain opportunities I mentioned earlier, and again we're really using the work that we're creating to really quality assure our work. That's really important, that we're now looking at is our work that we are procuring and that we're offering to businesses to say, come along, join us, this is going to help you grow, start and thrive. Actually, is it fit for purpose? And so we're challenging our own perceptions, and if it isn't, then we'll continue to challenge and we'll continue to build upon that to make sure that we have the right recipe, as it were, for want of a better terminology, so that the business is getting what they need and not necessarily what we think it's right for them. And that is really important through the engagement piece that we do. And then finally, just some takeaways, and it's something that I've had to remind myself to do whenever I'm scoping any new projects or engaging with businesses through any new activities or initiatives, is the program that we're doing, is it inclusive, and is it accessible? And then I just go through a list of what does that actually mean in the context of the work that we're doing. And that gives me quite a broad perspective in terms of who are the potential beneficiaries, where there may be gaps, and how can we make sure that they at least have sight of these opportunities. So then we're giving them options. They can decide whether it's for them or not. And I think we're not here to prophesize about enterprise or business support. We're just here to say this is available to you. What support do you need? If you're interested, what support do you need to access it? And so there is a learning curve that we're doing, but we're open to that learning curve. But I'm all about, if you want to see, you know, it's that whole thing, if you see it, then you believe it kind of thing. And if you want to see this kind of what I've just talked about in action, we've got our next Bain Pan London meeting, economic recovery meeting next week, Tuesday, the 14th, from 1 till 1:50. And for that event, we're bringing some education suppliers to the meeting, Bain-led education suppliers who really have been trying to get into the education in schools. And so we're hoping that, well, they're coming along, and we're hoping that we can bring other local authority representatives, specifically people who work with young people, schools, education, out of hour learning, those kind of things, to come along and just see the work in action, and then hopefully get a feel of the work that we're doing and giving visibility to these businesses. I think that's me done. So I'm going to hand back over. I think I've overstepped my time slightly, but
never, Deborah, never, not like. Listen, Deborah, thank you so much. I've just, you know, from what you were saying and bringing that kind of local authority context actually on the back of what we've been discussing has helped to kind of ground, I think, you know, the meeting. This is about the reality. It's about real actions. And I think you had a 2-point thing there where you said, is the programs that we're delivering, is it inclusive and is it accessible? And if that was the only checklist that moving forward from here we all undertook in all of the work that we deliver, then we would see change, wouldn't we? So thank you so much, Deborah. That was brilliant. I just want to, we have gone over time, but thank you so much for colleagues that have remained on the call, and for Dr. Brown and Professor Ram as well. Please let me come to you to kind of have the final words.
Yeah, okay, I'll just kick off. First of all, just let me say how hugely impressed I am with what Deborah has just said. I just think it just shows when a group of committed individuals who are sort of aware of the research, aware of the issues, have the experience of the lived reality of businesses, really go out their way to deliver as excellent professionals, not only on a social justice agenda, but on a just hugely professional agenda as well. So hugely impressed, and there's a lot for all of us to learn. Couple of things I wanted to pick up from what Sibusio said last time about sort of procurement, which I sort of fully endorsed. I'd just say sort of 3 things, or 2 or 3 things. First of all, you know, Sibusio is quite right that, and we've done research over 20 odd years on this, about, you know, sometimes the business is not being there or the sector's not ready. But that was said, you know, 25 years ago as well. And that is always said. It's been said on the recruitment agenda. We haven't got enough black candidates, etc. But and it's being said on the diversity supply chain agenda. What I would say is, you know, the regulations discriminate, wittingly or unwittingly, against particular kinds of firms, and those have to be questioned. So while there is a responsibility for to ensure that small firms are fit to supply, I think there's an equal responsibility to ensure that buyers are fit to procure. You know, the real responsibility lies there. That's my first point. My second point: the world doesn't come to an end with first-tier suppliers. Lots of pressure can be put on first-tier suppliers to make their supply chains inclusive. You know, we've got HS2 in our patch, well, connecting us with you in Birmingham, from Birmingham to London. But you know, and there's a real pressure being downward on the supply chain to ensure that they're inclusive. And I think we just need to be cognizant we can use that pressure to make supply chains more inclusive. And the third point, which, you know, Deborah has brilliantly sort of illustrated, you know, social value is a hugely neglected concept. I just don't mean in the public policy agenda. You know, lots of businesses that we write off, corner shops, cafes, etc., they add huge social value, right? But we don't recognize that in terms of the services they provide and who they employ and their durability. There was research done by a woman called Professor Suzanne Hall at LSE. She looked at streets in Peckham, in Birmingham, and in Leicester, and streets full of migrant, black and ethnic minority entrepreneurs. What she did was calculate the rateable value. She looked at their proficiency in language. A lot of these business owners spoke 4 to 5 different languages for business reasons. That was an asset. It wasn't a problem, it was an asset, right? And they had ties across the world, and they survived recessions, survived COVID, right? And she looked at their contribution, economic contribution, and compared it with, let's say, places that planners love, like Westfield Shopping Centre, right? And she said those streets were just hugely more valuable, but they're not recognised. And so what we have to do is not just see social value as a box to tick. We need to understand how black and ethnic minority business contributes social value, actually provide the answers to a lot of the problems that we do have. And so, thank you again for inviting me to this event. It's been hugely enlightening, and I've learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Professor Raman. You said something there, I had to put it in the chat, change the narrative. It's about organizations being fit to tender rather than about, people being fit to kind of respond to that tender. So brilliant, thank you. And I think definitely in line with what Deborah mentioned. Okay, so let me just go on to Dr. Colton Brown.
Thank you, Serena. Serena, just to pick up on one point in terms of local government, and before I summarize, give a summary, but quite often local governments have business hubs, which are responsible for training and developing and mentoring diversity businesses, and in essence to want to make them fit for purpose. So once they complete their program or project or their 12 hours of mentoring and coaching, quite often they get this tick box to say, well, you've had your procurement training, you've had your marketing training, we've validated what you do as a business, and we think you're now fit for purpose. So despite being fit for purpose, quite often they still go into the realms of a tender process, and what then happens is actually in real terms they're not fit for purpose. So for me, the litmus test is simple when we want to talk about moving forward. There's been a lot of research over the last 2 decades, 3 decades, and it's been found that the private and public sector have lacked substantive and transformative change regarding diversity and inclusion engagement. The diversity outcomes have been somewhat, in truth, underwhelming. And this has been substantiated through those various reports, which is going back for the last 2 decades. And there continues to be this disparity. So what we need to do, in my opinion, is, and the report bears this out, is to track progress will require a greater degree of transparency, accountability, and measurability. What has to be contextualized within monetary terms versus idealized progressive hyperbole. It has to be contextualized in real terms, and it has to be solution-led. It needs to be it needs to be binary, where the objectives and outcomes must have a symbiotic relationship. They has to come together. This is what we intend to do, and this is what happens, and these are the outcomes. So we have to have some form of determined, measurable, quantifiable matrix in both the public and private sector. If, as Boris Johnson would call it, leveling up has to happen. So that's my take on it. I think we have to be progressive, we have to be pragmatic, and we have to take real measurable steps to make a difference.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Colton. And let me just say again, like these sessions, they never fail to kind of energize. And it's funny because actually in my regen team, when I saw that my colleague Dev was on the call, we are grappling with support of a particular kind of business, and actually just being here today, although like I'm hosting it, so many ideas have kind of come through, so we'll definitely be able to kind of pick that up. But Listen, thank you so much to every single one of our speakers. It has just been incredible. One, that you have given your time, and two, that we've been able to kind of hear from all of the work, the academic work, and you know, the kind of work on the ground in terms of supporting organizations. It's just been really, really beneficial. And as always, we will circulate information in the chat, and once we have you know, kind of collated everything together, then we and use magic to turn it into a YouTube link, then we will circulate that for everyone on this call and on the distribution list. So let me just hand over now to Michaela. I think, Michaela, you just wanted to have some final words. She's probably going to try and kick me under the table and say, no, 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 you do it. But
hello everyone, thanks Serena, and thank you again to all of our amazing speakers for coming out today and for really delivering some insight and really delving into the experiences of BME entrepreneurs in our current climate. If you really enjoyed this, I'm going to post a feedback form in the email that goes out to everybody. Please let us know. Please suggest ideas for further conferences. If you really enjoyed this as well, put down some stars and just inform us. And once again, just thank you so much for taking the time out of your day. I know we went over 30 minutes, but so many of you are still here. So thank you for coming out, and thank you for all the support. We really appreciate it. And we'll see you at the next one.
take care. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Bye.
Take care. Cheers.